In the heart of Atlanta, the upscale restaurant Lolly buzzed with the energy of celebration. The elegant chandeliers cast a warm glow on the polished wooden tables, where laughter mingled with the clinking of glasses filled with fine wine. Dr. Lucas W., a distinguished black physician, sat surrounded by his colleagues, their faces alight with excitement. They raised their glasses, the rich tones of their voices rising in a toast to a significant medical breakthrough that had the potential to change lives. To innovation and healing, Lucas declared, a broad smile on his face. His colleagues echoed his sentiment, their voices blending harmoniously as they sipped their drinks. The atmosphere was vibrant, filled with a sense of brotherhood and achievement. "Lucas, I can't believe you led the charge on this," Amanda, a fellow physician, remarked, her eyes sparkling with admiration. "You've really outdone yourself." "It was a team effort," Lucas replied humbly, waving a hand dismissively. "We all played a part in this success, but I appreciate your support. It means the world to me." The laughter and camaraderie continued until an unexpected hush fell over the room. The heavy wooden doors swung open, and two police officers strode in, their uniforms stark against the restaurant's refined decor. The authoritative presence of the officers sliced through the celebratory atmosphere like a knife, drawing the attention of every patron present. As they approached Lucas's table, murmurs of confusion rippled through the crowd. "What do they want?" Amanda whispered, her brow furrowing in concern. Lucas straightened in his chair, an uneasy feeling settling in the pit of his stomach. The officers stopped directly in front of him, their expressions unreadable. "Dr. W? We need to see some identification," one officer said, his tone brusque and demanding. Lucas's heart raced, but he maintained his composure. "Of course, officer," he replied calmly, reaching into his jacket pocket to retrieve his ID. "Is there a problem?" The officer's eyes narrowed as he scrutinized Lucas, dismissing the polite inquiry. "Just doing our job. You don't belong here," he stated flatly, his disdain palpable. Lucas's colleagues exchanged incredulous glances, their expressions shifting from confusion to outrage. "Excuse me? What do you mean he doesn't belong here?" Amanda interjected, her voice rising in protest. "He's a respected physician. He's celebrating a professional achievement." The other officer, standing slightly behind the first, smirked. "Yeah, right, we've seen it all before. Just show us your ID, and let's move on." Lucas handed over his identification, feeling the heat of humiliation creeping up his neck. He could sense the tension rising in the room, as his colleagues fumed silently. The first officer inspected the ID with exaggerated scrutiny, as if searching for a reason to dismiss him. "Everything checks out," he muttered, shoving the ID back into Lucas's hand with a flick of his wrist. "But this doesn't mean you're welcome here. We'll be watching you." "Watching me?" Lucas echoed, incredulous. "What exactly is that supposed to mean? I'm here with my colleagues, celebrating our work, and you choose to disrupt us without cause." The officer stepped closer, their faces inches apart. "Just remember, we're in charge here. This isn't your neighborhood," he spat, his condescension dripping from every word. Lucas's colleagues bristled, outrage simmering just beneath the surface. "You have no right to treat him this way," one of them shouted, standing up and glaring at the officers. "This is unacceptable." But the officers merely exchanged glances, their expressions unyielding. It was as if the very air in the restaurant had thickened with tension, a palpable reminder of the systemic flaws that lay just beneath the surface of their celebration. As the officers turned to leave, Lucas felt the weight of their disdain linger in the air. The laughter and joy that had filled Lolly just moments before seemed a distant memory, replaced by a harsh reality that threatened to overshadow his triumph. The anger and confusion swirled within him, igniting a fire that he had never known before. As the tension in Lolly escalated, Lucas's colleagues surged to their feet, their voices a collective chorus of indignation. "This is unacceptable," shouted Amanda, a fellow physician who had been celebrating with Lucas just moments before. Her face was flushed with anger, and her hands trembled slightly as she gestured toward the officers. "You have no right to treat him this way." The officers, however, seemed unfazed by the outburst. Officer Daniels, a burly figure with a stern expression that spoke of years spent enforcing the law, smirked at Amanda's protest. "Ma'am, you might want to sit down and mind your own business." "We're just doing our job," he retorted, his tone dripping with condescension. "Your job?" Lucas interjected, his voice steady despite the tumult within him. "Is humiliating a respected doctor in front of his colleagues part of your job description?" The second officer, a younger man with a fresh buzz cut, chuckled derisively. "Yeah, Doc. Maybe you should stick to saving lives instead of acting like you're above the law. You think just because you wear a white coat, you can do whatever you want?" The restaurant manager, a well-dressed woman in her 40s, stepped forward, her expression a mix of concern and authority. "Officers, I must insist that you treat our guests with respect. There's clearly been a misunderstanding here." She attempted to ease the situation, but her words were brushed aside like autumn leaves in the wind. "Misunderstanding? We're simply checking if the doctor belongs here," Officer Daniels replied, his voice rising. "Not everyone fits the profile of this establishment, ma'am." An uncomfortable silence fell over the table as Lucas could feel the weight of their words pressing down on him. The arrogance of the officers was palpable, and he could see the disbelief in the eyes of his colleagues. They had fought for equity and inclusion in their medical careers, and now, witnessing this blatant act of racism, they felt powerless. After what felt like an eternity, Lucas was finally allowed to leave the table for the interrogation. The officers led him out of Lolly, their hands resting on their holsters, as if they were expecting trouble. He could hear the murmurs of his colleagues behind him, their frustration mingling with disbelief. As Lucas sat in the back of the police cruiser, the world outside seemed to spin in slow motion. The lights of Atlanta shimmered in the night, but all he could feel was the cold grip of humiliation. The officers peppered him with questions, their tone accusatory. "Where were you tonight?" Officer Daniels demanded, his eyes narrowing. "I told you, I was celebrating a professional achievement," Lucas replied, his voice faltering slightly under the weight of his own emotions. "And you think that gives you a free pass in this city?" the younger officer scoffed. The interrogation felt endless, the questions repetitive and draining. After what seemed like hours, they finally released him, but the humiliation lingered like a bitter aftertaste. As Lucas slid into the driver's seat of his car, he took a deep breath, trying to steady his racing heart. The anger and confusion swirled within him, a tempest of emotions that threatened to consume him. Driving home through the dimly lit streets of Atlanta, Lucas replayed the events in his mind, the disbelief washing over him in waves. How could this happen to him? He was a physician, a man of dignity and respect, yet his identity had been reduced to a stereotype in the eyes of those who were supposed to uphold the law. Arriving home, he found Thomas in the living room, his brother's eyes lighting up with concern as he noticed Lucas's troubled expression. "What happened, Lucas? You look like you've seen a ghost," Thomas said, his voice laced with concern. Lucas sank into the nearest chair, his hands trembling slightly as he recounted the evening's events. "They treated me like a criminal, Thomas, like I didn't belong there," he admitted, his voice thick with emotion. Thomas listened intently, his jaw tightening with each word. "This is a blatant act of racism, and it's not just happening to you. It's a reflection of a much larger problem," he said, his voice rising with indignation. "We need to fight back. We can't let this stand." "Fight back?" Lucas echoed, a mixture of disbelief and determination flashing in his eyes. "How do we even begin?" "We start by making noise. We gather our community, we talk to the press, and we hold those officers accountable," Thomas declared, his resolve solidifying with each passing second. "They need to know that this kind of behavior will not be tolerated. You're not just fighting for yourself, you're fighting for everyone who has faced this injustice." Lucas nodded slowly, the weight of his brother's words settling deep within him. The journey ahead would be daunting, but with Thomas by his side, he felt a flicker of hope ignite within him. In the early morning light, Thomas W. poured himself a strong cup of coffee, the steam curling upward like the unresolved tension in his mind. The events of the previous evening replayed in his head, a visceral reminder of the systemic injustice that plagued their community. He knew he had to take action. He opened his laptop, the screen illuminating his determined expression as he began his investigation into the police officers involved in Lucas's humiliation. "Let's see what dirt we can dig up," he muttered to himself, fingers poised over the keyboard. He began by searching for the officers' names, scrolling through a series of reports and news articles that documented previous encounters with the law. He noticed a pattern, one that sent a chill down his spine. A history of complaints ranging from excessive use of force to racial profiling. As the hours passed, he became increasingly engrossed in the data. Frustration bubbled within him, his righteous indignation growing with every line he read. Just then, his phone buzzed, breaking his concentration. It was Lucas. "Hey, I've got some news," Lucas said, his voice strained yet resolute. "Amanda and I are looking into the officers too. We found some alarming things." "Alarming? What do you mean?" Thomas leaned forward, intrigued. "Falsified statements in past cases," Lucas replied, his tone reflecting the weight of their discovery. "These officers have a history of bending the truth, and it's affecting innocent lives." "Are you serious?" Thomas felt a surge of anger. "This is bigger than I thought. We need to compile everything we find and prepare for a serious fight." "Agreed. We can't let this go unchallenged. People deserve to know the truth," Lucas said, determination edging his voice. After hanging up, Thomas continued his research, documenting every instance of questionable conduct linked to the officers. He drafted a timeline of events, piecing together a narrative of corruption that ran deeper than he had initially imagined. The more he unearthed, the clearer it became. The officers were not just rogue agents. They were part of a system that allowed such behavior to flourish. Meanwhile, at the hospital, Lucas and Amanda sat huddled over a stack of documents in a small conference room. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a sterile glow on their surroundings. Amanda flipped through a file, her brow furrowed in concentration. "Look at this," she said, pointing to a particular entry. "These statements don't match up at all. There are discrepancies in the reports filed by these officers." Lucas leaned closer, scanning the pages. The evidence was damning. "If we can prove that they've done this repeatedly, it could change everything," he said, his voice filled with a mixture of hope and disbelief. "Exactly. We need to connect the dots and show how their actions have real consequences," Amanda replied, her eyes brightening with the prospect of justice. "This isn't just about you, Lucas. This is about everyone affected by their misconduct." As they delved deeper into the evidence, the gravity of their findings became increasingly apparent. They discovered cases where innocent individuals had been wrongfully accused, their lives shattered by the very officers sworn to protect them. The weight of the injustice bore down on Lucas like a physical presence, igniting a fire within him. "We can't let this go unnoticed," Lucas said, his voice steady but filled with urgency. "We have to bring this to light." "Agreed. But how do we do that?" Amanda asked, glancing at him with a mixture of fear and anticipation. "First, we gather more evidence. Then, we need to reach out to the media. If we can get this story out there, it might just spark the change we need," Lucas explained, a newfound clarity guiding his thoughts. The two of them worked tirelessly, fueled by a shared sense of purpose. Each piece of evidence they uncovered felt like another step toward justice, a chance to hold the officers accountable for their actions. As the day wore on, Lucas and Amanda began drafting a comprehensive report that detailed their findings, hoping it would serve as a catalyst for change. At home, Thomas was equally engrossed in his work, crafting a legal strategy that would hold the officers accountable. He knew the road ahead would be fraught with challenges, but the thought of his brother's experience provided the motivation he needed. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over Atlanta, the brothers' resolve solidified. They were united in their mission, ready to confront the very system designed to protect those who abuse their power. The journey ahead promised to be difficult, but with every piece of evidence they compiled, hope flickered brighter in their hearts. Together, they were determined to bring justice not just for Lucas, but for their entire community. Lucas sat at the small, cluttered desk in his home office, his fingers tapping nervously against the polished wood surface. A steaming mug of coffee sat untouched beside him, the aroma mixing with the faint scent of ink and paper that filled the room. Across from him, Amanda spread out notes and articles she had printed, highlighting key points about the officers involved in the incident. The weight of their mission hung in the air, heavy but electric with potential. "Look at this," Amanda said, her voice barely containing her excitement. She pointed to a series of headlines that chronicled past incidents involving the same officers. "This isn't just a one-off thing. They've been involved in multiple cases of misconduct over the years. We need to get this information out there." Lucas leaned closer, his brow furrowed in concentration. "But how do we ensure it gets the attention it deserves? The police will try to bury this, just like they've done before. We need something more than just reports." As if on cue, Thomas walked in, his expression serious, yet determined. "I've been talking to some journalists. We can partner with them to expose this. They have the platform and the reach we need." He pulled out a chair and sat, his eyes shifting between Lucas and Amanda. "We're not just fighting for you, Lucas. We're fighting for everyone who's been wronged by the system." Lucas nodded, feeling a surge of appreciation for his brother. "I just want to make sure we do this right. I can't bear the thought of us getting bullied into silence again." "We won't," Thomas assured him, his voice low and steady. "We'll gather evidence, reach out to the community, and build a coalition. It's about time we hold them accountable." Over the next few days, the trio worked tirelessly, compiling testimonies and documents that painted a damning picture of the officers' actions. They reached out to local activists, community leaders, and journalists who could amplify their message. As their efforts began to gain traction, the story started to spread across social media, drawing attention from various news outlets. However, with increased visibility came retaliation. One evening, as Amanda and Lucas were leaving the office after a long day, they noticed an unmarked police car parked across the street. Its headlights flickered ominously, and a sense of dread washed over them. "Do you think they're watching us?" Amanda whispered, her voice tinged with concern. "Probably," Lucas replied, his heart racing. "They want to intimidate us." As they walked briskly to their car, Lucas couldn't shake the feeling that they were being hunted. The police had a history of using intimidation tactics against those who dared to challenge their authority. "We can't let them scare us into silence," he insisted, determination lighting his eyes. The following day, they received a warning from an anonymous source. A message slipped under the office door read, "Stop digging. You don't know what you're getting into." Lucas felt a chill run down his spine as he read it aloud to Amanda and Thomas. Thomas clenched his fists. "This is exactly what we expected. They're scared of the truth coming out, and they will do anything to silence us." "Then we need to make our voices even louder," Lucas said, resolve hardening in his voice. "We can't back down. Not now." With renewed vigor, they began organizing a community meeting, inviting residents to share their experiences with the police. Flyers were distributed, social media posts went viral, and soon a crowd began to gather at the local community center. The atmosphere crackled with energy as Lucas stood at the front, flanked by Amanda and Thomas. The room filled with faces, some familiar, others strangers, all united by a shared sense of injustice. "Thank you all for being here today," Lucas began, his voice steady yet impassioned. "We're not just here to talk about what happened to me. We're here to confront a system that has failed too many of us. We need to stand together, to demand accountability." The crowd erupted in applause, the sound echoing off the walls. Amanda stepped forward, her eyes shimmering with conviction. "This isn't just about police misconduct. It's about our rights, our dignity, and our community. We will not let fear dictate our actions." As Lucas looked around the room, he felt a flicker of hope ignite within him. They were building a movement, one that could no longer be ignored. Conversations flowed, stories were shared, and plans were made for future protests. But the police were not idle. As word spread about their gathering, officers began to patrol the area more frequently, casting long shadows over the burgeoning movement. Lucas felt the weight of their presence, a constant reminder of the fight ahead. Yet despite the intimidation, the community rallied behind Lucas, Amanda, and Thomas. Together, they would challenge the status quo, refusing to let fear stifle their voices. The fight for justice had only just begun, and they were ready to stand firm in the face of adversity. The air in Atlanta was thick with tension as protests erupted across the city in response to the recent events that had shaken the community. Signs bearing slogans like "Justice for Lucas" and "End Police Brutality" filled the streets. as people from all walks of life marched together in solidarity. The once vibrant atmosphere had shifted dramatically. Now, anger and determination coalesced in the hearts of the protesters. Dr. Lucas W., still reeling from the humiliation he faced at Lolly, watched the news coverage from his living room, his clenched fists resting on the coffee table. The television blared with images of his brother, Thomas, addressing a crowd of attentive citizens, his voice resonating with urgency. "We cannot stand idly by while our brothers and sisters are oppressed," Thomas exclaimed, his words cutting through the din of the crowd. "We must demand accountability from those who are sworn to protect us. This is not just about one man, it's about a system that fails to uphold justice." Lucas turned to Amanda, who was sitting beside him, her brow furrowed with concern. "Do you think this will make a difference?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Amanda nodded, her gaze fixed on the screen. "It has to. Thomas is rallying everyone. People need to see the truth." As the days went by, the protests only grew larger, and so did the divide within the city. Some residents supported the movement, while others clung to the old narratives, defending the police. The local news was filled with conflicting opinions, and social media erupted with heated debates. One evening, as Lucas and Thomas sat together in the kitchen, the weight of their mission hung heavily in the air. Thomas leaned forward, his fingers interlaced. "I've been digging through case files and records. It's worse than I thought," he said, his voice grave. Lucas looked up, alarmed. "What do you mean?" "There are multiple cases of wrongful convictions tied to those same officers. People's lives have been ruined because of their lies and misconduct," Thomas replied, his eyes blazing with anger. "We have to expose this, Lucas. We need to bring their actions to light and fight for those who can't fight for themselves." Lucas felt a surge of determination rise within him. "Then let's do it. We can't let this go on any longer. If we can show the community the full extent of what's happening, maybe we can start to change things." With newfound resolve, they began to strategize. As they pored over documents late into the night, the brothers discovered an alarming pattern. Multiple individuals had been wrongfully convicted on the basis of contrived evidence and coerced testimonies from the very officers involved in Lucas's incident. Each story was more heartbreaking than the last, reinforcing their commitment to seek justice. "Look at this one," Thomas said, pointing to a case file. "A man spent 15 years in prison because of these officers. He was innocent the whole time." Lucas's heart sank. "We need to reach out to these people, help them tell their stories." "Yes, we can organize a public hearing. If we can gather enough evidence and testimonies, we can hold the police accountable," Thomas exclaimed, his voice filled with urgency. As the brothers prepared for the upcoming hearing, the stakes grew higher. The city was abuzz with anticipation, and the community's eyes were on them. Lucas felt the weight of responsibility on his shoulders as he reflected on how far they had come. "Do you think we can really make a difference?" he asked Thomas one night, doubt creeping into his voice. "Lucas, change is never easy, but it starts with people like us who are willing to stand up and fight," Thomas replied, placing a reassuring hand on his brother's shoulder. "We owe it to everyone who has suffered because of this system." On the day of the public hearing, the atmosphere was electric. Supporters filled the room, their faces a mix of hope and apprehension. As Lucas prepared to speak, he felt the weight of the community's expectations resting on him. He understood that their fight was not just for justice for himself, but for countless others whose voices had been silenced. As he stepped up to the podium, Lucas took a deep breath, ready to share his truth and the truths of those who had been wronged. The journey ahead was fraught with challenges, but he could feel the unyielding spirit of his community behind him, and he knew they were all in this together. The atmosphere in the crowded hearing room was charged with anticipation as Dr. Lucas W. took his place at the witness stand. The air felt heavy, thick with unspoken words, and the weight of countless injustices that had been brushed aside for too long. As he looked out at the sea of faces, some familiar, others strangers, he could see the hope and desperation reflected in their eyes. This was more than just a hearing, it was a pivotal moment, a chance to shine a light on the darkness that had plagued their community. "Dr. W., please state your name and profession for the record," the presiding judge intoned, his voice steady and authoritative. "Dr. Lucas W., I am a physician practicing in Atlanta," Lucas replied, his voice calm but layered with emotion. He took a deep breath, gathering his thoughts as he prepared to recount the harrowing events that had transpired in the restaurant. "On the night of my celebration, I was confronted by 2 police officers who questioned my presence there. I was made to feel like a criminal in a place where I had every right to be." As he spoke, the room fell silent, the audience hanging on his every word. I complied with their demands, but the disdain and contempt in their voices were palpable. I was not just being interrogated, I was being dehumanized. Lucas paused, allowing the weight of his testimony to sink in. This is not an isolated incident. This is a pattern, a reflection of systemic racism that exists within our institutions. His words resonated deeply, drawing nods of understanding from members of the community who had faced similar experiences. In the back of the room, Thomas sat, his heart swelling with pride for his brother's courage. He watched as Lucas continued, his passion igniting a fire in those present. "We cannot stand idly by while our rights are trampled upon. We must demand accountability and change." Just as the applause began to swell, a figure in uniform stood up, his expression a mix of defiance and unease. It was Officer Davis, one of the men who had confronted Lucas that night. "I'm not denying what happened," he began, his voice shaky. "But you don't understand the pressures we face. It's not just us, it's the system that's broken." A murmur of disbelief rippled through the audience, but it was the next words that sent shockwaves through the room. "I'm here to confess," Officer Davis said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "There's a broader scheme. We've been ordered to target specific individuals, to meet quotas. It's not just about policing, it's about maintaining control." Gasps echoed in the hearing room, and Lucas's heart raced. This was the moment they had hoped for, yet the implications were staggering. "What do you mean by maintaining control?" Lucas pressed, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside him. "Higher-ups in the department, they've been complicit. They've encouraged us to manipulate evidence to pressure innocent people. I can't do it anymore," Officer Davis confessed, his shoulders slumping under the weight of his admission. The revelation ignited a wave of outrage and disbelief, and the room erupted in chaos. Thomas quickly stood, raising his hand to calm the crowd. "This is a breakthrough. We need to take this information seriously. This is not just about one night. This is a call to action for all of us." As the proceedings began to settle, Lucas felt a renewed sense of purpose. The fight was far from over, but they had a powerful ally, an insider willing to expose the corruption that had festered for too long. In the weeks that followed, the investigation intensified. With the evidence gathered from the hearing, Thomas and Lucas launched a movement to review past convictions affected by the same corrupt practices. They established a non-profit organization to assist victims of police misconduct, ensuring that their voices would be heard and that justice would be pursued relentlessly. Standing together at the forefront of this movement, the brothers felt a profound connection to their community, fueled by the belief that change was possible. As they looked toward the future, they were not just brothers fighting for justice. They were champions of a cause that transcended their individual experiences. The journey had transformed them, igniting a passion within that would guide their efforts long into the future. "Together, we can create a system that works for everyone," Lucas said, his eyes shining with determination. "This is just the beginning." Thomas nodded, a fire igniting in his chest as he replied, "And we won't stop until justice is served."